Welcome to the 36th in a series of shows focused on Brookline as an age-friendly community. In 2012, the World Health Organization named Brookline its first age-friendly city in New England. This was the result of work by the Select Board, the town departments, Brookline residents, and Brookline Can, an all-volunteer organization that works on issues for residents of all ages. Tonight we have a guest, or today we have a guest, James Pouliot. James is the web developer for the town of Brookline. Communication and interconnectedness in Brookline is extremely important for everybody, but especially for older adults. And that depends greatly on the existence of a website that we can rely on. James Pouliot's a former journalist of NBC and WBUR who left media to study web design. He's now in a position where he's working on Brookline's website and making it easier to use for a major redesign that's coming next month. Welcome, James.
Hi, so nice to be here.
First of all, let's start out. I say web developer like everybody knows what that means. Can you give us an idea of what your role is?
Right, so I'm the guy who sits behind the curtain and creates new pages, edits existing pages. Maybe I'm, retyping some of the information that's on there, or making it a little easier to tell how to get through all the menus. I basically decide the shape of the website, and then we have all sorts of people who work for the town in the different departments who decide what's on it.
And my understanding is you're in the process of redesigning it to improve its ease of use, its consistency. And so I'm going to be really comfortable when I go on it.
That's the hope anyway, yeah. So every 4 years, the IT department tries to do a big redesign for the web page, make sure it's up to date, make sure that, any bugs or any navigation issues that have crept into it are addressed. And this time what we're focusing on is navigation, which means how do I get from the front page to where I want to go? That's kind of the biggest issue that we have right now. We did a big website survey that some of you might have seen. It's in there's a link to it in the top right of your web page. I don't know if it's the top left where I'm on the screen. Whichever. I won't gesture right or left, but you'll see there's a link to a website survey at the top right of the web page, and we've been collating all those responses. And the number one thing that we heard was, all of the information's there, I just can't find it. So that's an issue with that navigation idea, that how do I get from the front page and then know each step of the way that I'm getting closer to where I want to be.
Yeah, that describes very much situation that I've run into. When I try to do some research for this show, when I try to, and I go in and I think it's very ordinary. I'm just looking for particular department and checking what it does. And one department will work out great. I'll find it like this. Another one I'll look at and it'll give me 3 different links and only a piece of the information.
Yeah,
it's there. I know it's there. So it's a question of.
And you found it once before, but now you can't find it again, right?
Exactly.
So we're hoping to avoid that kind of thing.
Great. And what about getting information out? I mean, like I just go to the website and I expect to see something there that's relevant to me. When I go to the front page, I mean, I expect to see something that's relevant to the day. And sometimes I do. Sometimes I do.
Right. Yeah. So that's actually a part of the redesign as well. One of the big changes that people are going to see is the homepage is going to look completely different than it does right now, or at least many parts of it are going to look different. We're going to try to take down a lot of the scrolling that you have to do to find things. You'll have more right in front of you right when you get onto the page, and then you'll have information about any big calendar events hopefully is going to end up in the top, the first view that you see when you open the site. Big news items or guides, anything that's new is going to end up, pretty close to that first page. And then also we have two things. One of them is sort of an alert for information that we're putting up right front and center for, let's say there's a snow emergency or it's time to get elected to town meeting or what have you. We'll have information there. And then we'll also have what I'm calling the special button, which is more of an alert about tasks that you might want to do. Maybe it's time to pay your taxes, or I'm not sure what the task you do.
No, James, I go in and I want to put in, I just want to get my permit for the year for parking on a certain street where I have some permission.
Right.
But I have to file it. I have to file a whole bunch of things. And I've done it a couple of times. It's just that each time I went in, it was different. And but it's improving. So that's one item, but certainly taxes is an obvious one. Certainly, certainly any kind of service that I've got to go get. I sort of want help.
Right.
But I do.
Yeah. So we're trying to address this in a couple different ways. The first is that we're going to be focusing on what are the main things people come to the website for. We don't want to think about users' needs rather than the structure of the government. So that means saying, when you get on the main page, there are probably 5 or 6 or 7 things that most people want. They want to get their new parking permit. They want to get let's say a license to run a business. They want to file a report of some kind. The top tasks. We want to put those buttons right up there in front of you, right to start with. And we're also doing a similar philosophy for any given department. Like, let's say maybe you have something that's a little bit more of a niche concern, and it has to do with the building department. You go to the building department page, they probably have their own set of things that they all get calls about, right? Everyone needs a building permit, everyone needs an inspector, and then maybe 10% of people need like the other 90 things they do, right?
Right.
But for the most part, you can catch most people with just a few tasks. So we want to have right front and center on the building department page, for example, or any other department, big graphical buttons that get you right where you're going, rather than having to go through, oh, here's this menu, and then it goes here and then there, where you're trying to, piece your way to the thing.
Yeah, I like big graphical buttons.
Yeah. The nice thing about graphics is, you can have the graphic and a little label so people know what it means, but then the next time you go, you say, I remember last year when I got my parking permit, it was a blue, let's say it's a parking meter. A blue parking meter, and your brain immediately zooms into that, and you see it much quicker than you'd see it if you were trying to read through a list of items.
Yeah, absolutely, because that's exactly what you look for. But and I'm sure people are different. We all look for a little different things. Some like lists, some like but you can always get a list. I'm sure that's the last. That's the last resort. But the best thing is to go in and recognize cars, right? Or something to do with cars, houses, something to do with housing, the taxes, etc. That I have not seen that at all on this website when I've gone there, and that's something that's a great idea, actually.
You're going to see a lot more of that pretty soon. I think what we're trying to do is talk to the website vendor without going into the details of how all this goes on, because no one needs to hear about that. I have certain powers, and then we have a vendor who wrote the program that I use to manipulate the website to make changes. And we're talking with that vendor to build a whole library of different buttons that then I can go through and sort through and say, I want something about cars, and find, a parking meter and a car and a bus icon and so on and so forth, and choose that. So a bunch of different buttons that will look sort of in the same graphical style, the same world as each other, but we can use them for whatever we like in the future.
Right. I don't want to have to relearn buttons every time I see a different one.
And it's also an accessibility issue. I mean, it's it's very nice to have that for speed, right? You know, like we want to quickly get from one place to another and see the button and recognize it and go there. But also, not everyone speaks English as a first language. Not everyone has the same ability to read, you know, text that might be small or in a strange color or what have you. So it's incredibly helpful to have multiple ways to understand what's going on the website.
Speaking of accessibility, and
Sure. What a segue.
jump ahead just a little bit. The question, you know, we're doing a recording and we've had meetings and they have closed caption. And they have, when there's voices, can you have the reverse? Can you have where there's text get sound? In case I can't see it, either impaired vision or, as you say, maybe reading or language. Can I hear? I don't want a translation necessarily. I think I'm asking for too much.
Sure.
But can I get sound rather than text?
So I think what you're talking about is called a screen reader, right? Let's say I'm someone with low vision who might not be able to read the text on the page.
Yep.
There are special programs that they look at the page and they can read all of the text that's on it. And they can even read if there's let's say an image, a photograph, there's sort of a hidden text that's behind the photograph that you and I won't normally see when we're reading the web page. But it will say, for example, photograph of 3 people smiling and holding shovels, or whatever it happens to be.
So for instance, car graphic.
Yeah, car graphic, exactly. Or it might read a link and say, oh, link to Brookline MA/retirement department, or whatever it happens to be. That's actually a big concern that we're trying to do right now, because I don't know, you know, if you haven't used a screen reader before, it's not obvious exactly how different the experience is. And it's very, very different. It's not all, some of the things that look really easy, if you can see the link, for example, are pretty difficult for screen readers. Like you've seen all these links that say, click here with a little link. Then it has, you know, click here for more information about whatever. Well, if you're tabbing through and you're using a screen reader, probably what you'll do is click a button that makes it so that the screen reader just goes through every link that's on the page. And then if you have a bunch of different links that say, click here, you don't know what each one of those links is, because the screen reader is just saying, click here, click here, click here, click here. Right. So it's a big accessibility issue, you know. So we're working right now. I've actually just gotten a screen reader license to be able to use a reader on my own, so I can test all of our pages and make sure they work properly. And I'm also going through all of our pages to make sure that our links are proper, to make sure that any images that we have, you know, have that hidden text that I was talking about, so the screen reader will tell them what is going on in the image. We're also working with a new vendor, and I don't want to go too much into specifics because we're still, you know, in the negotiation phase here. But we're working with a new vendor who's going to automate some of those processes. For example, going through and checking all of the thousands of PDFs we have on the site to make sure that they are readable by a screen reader, or readable if you have different kinds of visual impairment. So the hope is that we're going to have a much more accessible site in the future.
Yeah, that's really great. We did a show with impaired vision, for instance, and people on it were able to use their phones. Their phones get a screen reader on their phones and tablets, and they didn't have it on the website. But it's yeah, that's the kind of thing that really improves accessibility. What about phones? I've tried to use the website on the phones, and it sort of works, but it's sort of, you struggle.
Yeah, so again, a big issue. We have, I want to say it's 35% of the people who are using this website are using it on a mobile phone. And the truth is, if you do that, you've almost certainly noticed that there are pages where, you know, the different bits sort of don't seem to be connected the same way that they are when you look at it on your computer screen. And that's an issue called mobile responsivity, or responsive design. Basically, what your computer is doing is saying, how wide is the screen that I'm displaying this on, Now let me rearrange things so that it will fit on that screen rather than having to, move the screen all over the place, right?
Excellent.
Uh, our site, the truth is, our
Sounds
site
hard,
doesn't
by the way.
always respond to that way. Sorry?
Yeah, that sounds difficult, by the way.
It's tough. Yeah,
Because we have
it's a
all
tough
different
thing
things.
because you have to find a way to tell the computer how to automatically rearrange content in a way that's going to make sense on a completely different device. Not only is it much smaller, it might be in landscape view, where it's like this, or in portrait view. You're using your hand to touch a screen rather than using a mouse. It's a completely different interface. You don't have as many buttons available. You don't
Right.
have as much space where if you're on our normal website, for example, our desktop version, you probably have the middle of the screen has a lot of content in it, and then the side has maybe contact information, and the other side is a menu, and you can see it all at the same time. But if
Right.
you're on a mobile screen, if we tried to do that, then you just have this tiny little strip of content down the middle. So now we've got to say, okay, well, we have to strip out the menu and we have to strip out the contact information, but they still need to be in there somewhere, and they still need to be findable and usable
Right.
by someone on a completely different device. So it's a big concern. That's something we're also working on. It's a pretty high priority because 1 in 3 people that are using the website are doing that.
Sounds like work of an AI or something. It's yeah, you really
In a
do.
lot of ways it is. Yeah, it's
I mean, you've got to somehow take into account the human interface on different devices, which is one device I understand, but different types of devices sounds kind of difficult. Well, any improvement would be really great there. In addition, where are we going? Do you have any particular plans that we should know about that are going besides, you've been giving me so much, but
I was going to say that's where we're
but what
going.
about
Yeah.
the one I keep getting concerned about, and I actually brought this up to you once, but the question of information, getting information out, right? You're looking at, we've had a pandemic, we had lots of information, but most of it certainly now was either late, it didn't include data available related to the situation. I'm not just pandemic. I mean, an emergency, climate emergency. We're getting bigger and bigger storms very often. What about storms? What about the nor'easters, the bomber whatevers that blow up? When do we get that kind of information? And when it happens, how do we know when it's either no longer a problem or still is a problem or has changed? I want it's one thing to say it's there and it's shown there's an emergency. Where do I go back to get the next step? I want to go back to the same place, right?
So
I
you're
want to go back.
saying, yeah,
Right.
you're saying, okay, you'll get the alert on the front page, but then you say, okay, I know there's a big storm happening. What's the next step? How do I? Yeah, I think that's something that we need to think about as we're moving forward. And that's unfortunately, I'm the kind of guy, I want to automate everything. I want to have it just work on its own. But there are certain problems when you're putting out content like this, when you have you know, unpredictable storms or an unpredictable emergency that's happening in town. You can't really automate the little button that says, oh, and here's where you can find more information. That's something that we have to talk more to departments about and say, okay, if you are writing a news post that's going to go on the website about, let's say it's a storm, let's make sure always, every time we have a little link at the bottom. Here's the most related page to this. So you can imagine you write out, there's going to be a big storm Monday through Friday. That's a long storm. There's going to be a big storm Monday through Friday. And we're expecting such and such amount of rain. And here's where you can go. Here's a link to the emergency management page, or here's a link to where you can find out a checklist to build an emergency kit or whatever. That's something you really have to do on a case-by-case basis and remember to do every single time. So that'd be more of a training matter than a web automation kind of matter.
Right. And I think the training is really, yeah, I think
Right.
that's a key item also. That's
Mhm.
that's something, in fact, the use of the website from the older adult point of view. We have a senior center, we have Brookline Can, we have this show. The use as the website is developed and when it comes out, use of it, a training tool would be really useful that goes along with it.
So I don't want to reveal too much, but we are actually considering an option we've called a website academy that's longer range than the redesign. I don't want to advertise a timeline. I do not have it, but one part of the homepage is going to be guides about how to live in Brookline, like how do you do your trash, and then an accompanying part of it, not the homepage necessarily, but accompanying part of that guide structure is going to be how do you use the website itself. So that's a longer range project, but it is on the radar, so to speak.
Yeah, that would be great. That's the kind of thing I'm looking for information sharing, connectedness, and the needs. When people need something, they know where to go, and it leads them to where they need to be. That's, it doesn't have to all be in the same place. It's obviously it's going to be some cases better than others, but right now it doesn't exist.
Yeah. Well,
exist.
and of course the ideal is to build it in such a way that you don't need a guide, but we'd like to have a guide anyway.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and as thinking about this town as sort of a very, very large company, we're selling a lot. We're putting out a lot of different services. We have so many different departments doing all sorts of different things with different workflows. I mean, if we were a company, we'd be more like a Walmart than your local mom and pop candy shop that's sort of selling one thing and can focus on that. So having those guides, having a little bit of extra help to do all of the many things that we're doing, that'd be helpful for sure.
So another subject.
Sure.
The question of getting information. It's new. You're a journalist, right? Your background.
Yes,
I did mention.
That's my background, yeah.
Right. So the need, and obviously that's a problem today in the world. I mean, we're losing local papers. We're losing much of the news that we see is, I'll say talking heads, I'm criticizing, but
sure.
Is rather than the news itself, or rather than things that are directly related to fact, and of course they may not be needed, need to see something. So where do we get on news when tab becomes not available any longer, which is a couple of weeks? Where do we get, and I don't know that that's not what you're working on.
Sure.
But the question is, I have the sense that there's no planning, and I've talked to people about this, that there's no person or central point for content. They don't have to provide the content, but make the connections to where the content comes from. For instance, the library has regular news coming out. Who makes sure the library might send out a tweet or this or that, but it's not only not consistent, but it's not necessarily going to the people who care, and the people who do care may not be seeing it. I represent older adults. It's very possible that they don't even look. The only place online they might look is the town website, because they don't use those. They certainly don't use social. They may not use social media. They may, of course, but they're not going to find this. So I sense that there's a need for a content person, communication person, something that is responsible not so much for the technology, but for the information distribution.
I think
of that?
Without wanting to go into, so-and-so should hire this position or that position, it's not my job to decide. I think it makes sense. I think it's a valid concern. One of the ways I think we're hoping to do that kind of thing is with our social media feeds, but we do have probably 20 or 30 different social media feeds attached to the town. So different departments have their own, the police department and fire and so on have their own things. Right. So you can imagine, even if you're hooked into social media, if you're on Twitter, you might not see it if you're not following the right people.
Yeah, what about a neighborhood, a Brookline Can Twitter?
Brookline
Twitter, I mean. A Brookline Twitter, or a Brookline Facebook, or a Brookline group that's entirely a place. Brookline News Twitter, right? That
Sure.
it's the place you go. Just a thought, but it's the place you go. I know they have things like that for neighborhoods, etc., but they never have news. What they have is, gossip, etc., various
Mm.
connections, complaints, and there's nothing wrong with that. But you don't know, you don't expect. I hear sirens in the area. I wonder what's happening. Well, it might be a police thing you can go to, or a neighbor you can ask, does anybody understand what the sirens, what's happening? By the way, it looks like a fire outside my building. Things, those kinds of things happen in all different places, little pieces here and there, and nobody knows that there's a place to go to find out what's happening. And I realize you can't do that on the website.
Yeah, not always going to be the thing unless it's coming from the town or from one of our departments. Not always going to be the best place to find it here. No, you could imagine like a Facebook group, or you could imagine. I think in the ideal world it would be some local journalist, right? Some paper, and I don't know what the economics of that is. It's no longer my bag.
No, well, then there's a couple of people around that are doing little journalism kind of things from the past that are local that might be worth checking. And I'm really looking for some direction. And I think you're giving me some by not disagreeing and by by accepting the idea.
I have no
Right.
comment on this matter, to use a journalist.
Yeah, no, and I don't want you to do that. I really want to get out there the idea that that's something that we should be looking at. And maybe it's the town, maybe it's an individual group or whatever. But anybody looking at this that has any ideas, send them back into wherever we have ideas. Brookline Can would be good, the Brookline Can organization. That's ideas coming there, get processed and get used. Okay, I'm just going to give you an opportunity to bring up anything else you want to at this point for.
Yeah. Well, okay. So one of the things that people keep asking us about, and I don't want to get away from here without having this answered, is our search box. So we've talked about it being difficult to be on the main page and know exactly where to go from there, and then where to go from there, and so on. And then when people say, oh, well, I couldn't find a thing just by clicking through links, let me search for it. Oh gosh, the search function isn't working too great. I couldn't find it on search either. That was the second highest thing. I think about a quarter of the complaints that we got were about the navigation on the web survey. And the second largest quarter was the search box being difficult. So I will tell you right now, there are some things that we can do immediately that we're already doing. We're going into every page, and sort of in the back end, behind the scenes, we can add keywords to tell the website what's on that page, and maybe give it, it can read the page, but maybe it doesn't know all the synonyms for the words. So for example, if I have a page about disclaimers for using the website, maybe it can, if you search disclaimer, you'll find it, but if you search legal or appropriate use or any of these other words, then it won't find it because it doesn't know that it's the same thing. So as I'm going through redesigning things, one of the things I'm doing is adding these keywords, adding a little bit more scaffolding, something for the website to grab onto when it's searching. And then we're also considering options to improve the programming of the search bar. And I don't want to speak too much about that because, again, we're still in this negotiation phase. But suffice to say, we're working along multiple metrics to clean up what the search bar is doing, and then also make each upcoming website a little bit more searchable as well.
Well, I'm really looking forward to it. I got to tell you.
Me too.
So, and I will say, I just will comment that you've been making changes, and I know that because I've seen changes over the last at least few weeks. So there's been changes that have been happening, but and that's nice to see. But it's but I'm really looking forward to as we go forward, the work you do and the new website and where it goes from here. So
well, I hope you're going to see a lot more changes you like.
Right. And I want to thank you very much. Anytime you want to come on, and perhaps when it comes out, if you want to discuss it after it comes out for a little bit, go over any new ideas that have come up or things that you need. That would be great. And I
Absolutely.
really, thank you thank you again. I
Thank
want
you.
to tell everybody else that the program will be rebroadcast several times in the next few weeks. That the programs are available, and all the programs are available on Brookline Can's website, brooklinecan.org, and the Brookline Can and Facebook, the Twitter and Facebook social medias will distribute the links. Thank you, everybody. Take care and be safe.